Yes, you're welcome back. There's a game which over the weekend we cannot forget about. A game between Harold Wanyama in white and, of course, we know Harold Wanyama, a common figure and a common person we've talked about on this channel, who calls himself, or we call him the number three Africa rapid player. And also this time we have him against Kadu Ivan. Kadu Ivan is one of the chess players from Uganda, usually known as the lecturer. This time he proved himself to be the real lecturer of the game as he took Harold to school and into a deep dark forest. So this guy, Ivan Kadu, is one of the managers of the Common Chess Club. And let's see what really happened in this game. This was the Uganda National League over the weekend rapid chess game. So the game continued on with a move d4. Of course, we expect Harold always plays d4, and then we see d5, common standard move. C4, of course, we expect c6 going into the Slav defense. So we see knight to c3, and then we see e6. Of course, this is the accelerated move order, Slav, semi-Slav defense. Of course, we continue on with e3, and then on board we have f5. F5 is an amazing choice at this position, but of course we know that these are positions which have been played, and then we see knight to f3. Of course, we see knight to f6. Everything is pretty standard, and these are games which have been played. This is not new at the top level. And then we see on the board bishop to d6, and then we continue to see this move short castle, and then also black short castles. At this point, we have seen moves like knight to e5, b3, queen to e2, but we have never seen at the top level, we have never seen such a move that Harold played. We can call it a novelty from Harold Kongs for this amazing move appearance, which has never been played at the master level. Queen to e2. Queen to e2, of course, comes in handy. Of course, a nice idea, of course, holding everything intact. Then we see on the board knight to e4. Knight to e4, of course, we expect Kadu is very confident that nothing can touch that knight, and even though it's touched, everything is in control. So we see that he picks with the c pawn, and then we see also Ivan Kadu picks with the c pawn. So the game is still intact. Then we see on board g3. It's not an amazing move here, g3. Everything is still going on pretty well. And then on board we see the knight coming out to d7. Of course, I believe he was holding ideas of knight to f6, and then we see the knight retreating back to d2. Then we see the knight coming where it was supposed to be, and then we see f3 chasing away that knight. This is a very amazing position, very standard position, and of course chasing away that knight. At this point, Ivan Kadu chooses to take that knight, and then we see bishop takes knight. Then we see e5 on board. This is a position where black really takes the initiative. Black is playing like white. Black is really pushing harder. Very strong recommendations and confidence from Ivan Kadu. Then we see at this moment the bishop retreating back, allowing him to just put a dagger in the Harold's position. Then we see the bishop being pushed around, of course, trying to get some counterplay, but of course the bishop comes in. Then the knight. I like how this guy Ivan Kadu really puts back his knights, of course, away from danger, and then the rook comes in, and then we see the knight being kicked back. Then we see this the knight going back to c3, and then we see the king. This was a very subtle move, king to h8, of course, avoiding any future attacks on the king. And then we see the knight trying to maneuver. Of course, we know the knight is maneuvering to c5, and then we see the bishop coming back for that knight, but of course the knight cannot be stopped. But then the bishop falls back away from the knight attack, and then we see rook to c2. Of course, we see the maneuvers from the queen. At this point, of course, I can see that the queen is really struggling white is really struggling to find better moves at this point. We don't see any good moves for white at this point. Then we see white really trying to just wait, holding around for some moves, and then we see this queen to h5. At this point, this is when we see that really Harold runs out of patience. Harold runs out of moves with the move bishop to b5, bishop to b4 rather. So the right move would have been A simple f4 would have been okay, and of course Ivan Kadu also had to find the good follow-up. But in this position, it was really hard for White to play, and of course we see the first inaccuracy and a mistake by Harrod, and then we see this bishop being kicked around. Of course, it went further wrong when Harrod just really buried this bishop. Please note that this is a rapid game. Of course, I don't really remember the time pressure conditions on the board, but we see that Harrod just goes further wrong after a very strong squeeze from Black's play. So everything just, of course, b5 was called for, b5 is coming, and at this point Harrod just chooses sacrifice. Of course, it was even enough to just pick with a pawn, but Ivan Kadu also goes for an inaccuracy with knight picks. Of course, Harrod takes back the piece, but of course we have to take back our advantage with the bishop trapped on a3. So the game continues with an attack, trying to fight back with a counterplay, but of course the bishop falls back, and then we can see the queen picking the pawn. Of course, we can see the queen is coming for that rook. Then we see the bishop being developed, and everything comes up with tempo. The rook tries to get out of danger, and then the bishop comes with quite some precision here on the rook, and then we see a rook coming in on the 7th rank, the desirable and desired 7th rank. So we see the bishop also coming up. Of course, he has ideas of coming to get the rook and pin that some getting more pieces into towards the king side for a checkmate. And then we see Harrod trying to go for a kill. Of course, we know that this guy wants to get a checkmate, but of course, at this point, Ivan Kadu had to be very cautious and careful. He first puts up with the bishop, not worried that if he takes, of course, there's a rook being replaced at this point. So we see the bishop takes the rook, and of course we see a move coming in, which is queen to d1 check. This is a very deadly position, of course, for White, with all pieces, only the rook trying to save the king. With all these bishops around the king, of course we know this is really curtains for Harrod. So we see the bishop coming in, and at this point Harrod threw in the towel and said it's enough is enough. So see you next time. These are games you shouldn't forget as we still continue the Mombasa Open. Keep watching. Bye.